to the latest edition of Beyond the Arc. I'm John Gonzalez alongside Sam Quinn from CBSSports.com. What's going on, Sam?
My instinct is always to say nothing much because, like, I went to middle school and I went to high school,
You gotta
but
sell
I'm
it,
also
man.
a basketball writer, and there's always stuff going on. So, like, I need a new greeting.
Yeah, we need you to sell this. This is a performance art. We got all kinds of things going on on the show.
Going on. That's why
we have too many things going on in basketball. We're going to do something a little bit different, a little bit fun today. It occurred to me when Kyrie unfortunately nuked his knee the other day that things are not going well in Dallas. I don't know if you had the same thought as well, but then I was thinking, Nico Harrison has gotten absolutely crushed recently, and it made me think about, you recently wrote a story ranking all 30 NBA front offices. And I thought this is a good time for us to revisit that, because the other day on the show, Bill and I were talking about, like, what's the more grim situation between Dallas Mavericks fans, Suns fans, and Sixers fans, which led to a conversation. And that then begot this conversation, which we're going to have now. So we're going to go through your power rankings, all 30 teams. You have them neatly divided into tiers. I think you did a pretty good job in some places and a terrible job in other places. I'm going to take umbrage with things, Sam Quinn, but let's start with your tier one, nearly perfect rankings.
Yeah, I have three teams in this group. It's number 1, Thunder, number 2, Celtics, number 3, Spurs. I think you could probably argue that the top two have a little bit of separation from number 3, but do you have any big arguments here?
No, I don't. I mean, what Sam Presti has done in Oklahoma City is just absolutely incredible. The only thing that you could nitpick on this, and it's like just like a nice problem to have, is that every few years, kind of like they did last year when they had a trade for Gordon Hayward, just because they'd have an expiring contract, is they got to clear some room at the end of the bench. And like, they'll have some good, useful players who they'll just have to move on from in order to clear up roster spots. But they've got too many incoming picks, I guess, is a happy problem to have.
The whole idea here is, as guys get expensive, they'll be able to cycle in new cheap guys with all the picks that they have. I think once they win a championship, and you would assume, knock on wood, that happens relatively soon, you'll be able to argue that the Thunder should be in a tier of their own here. I mean, they've done everything right. Like, what is the mistake the Thunder have made basically since losing Kevin Durant? I don't think that one really exists.
Yeah, it's really remarkable what they've put together here. Just as a quick side here, because you mentioned that the Thunder might win a championship sooner rather than later, and I think that that's probably correct. On yesterday's show, Bill and I had a conversation about what the best possible finals matchup would be for the league. And from a basketball perspective, it's hard to argue against the Thunder. From like a ratings, marketing, PR perspective, much easier to argue against the Thunder. Where do you think the NBA ends up if the Thunder go on like a Warriors-like run of multiple finals over the next few years?
Well, I think at the very least, you do kind of want the Thunder to be in the finals this year, because they're going to be so present in this conversation for the next several years that you need to prop them up now, because, like, get used to it. They're not going anywhere.
I think not. I go the other way. I think you're right. They're going to be around. They're not going anywhere. Don't you want, I mean, if you're the league, you absolutely want Luka and LeBron in the finals. You've got the Lakers, Luka in it for a second straight year, making a finals with a different team, and then LeBron at 40. Like, that's an incredible storyline, not to mention the Lakers.
If we're doing the David Stern thing, their preference would be Lakers versus Lakers. But I'm thinking about the health of the league for the next 5-10 years, not just, what's going to draw the best rating today. I think the reality here is the Thunder are going to probably make the finals several times in the next few years, just given the way that they're set up. They're so fun to watch. I think it would be healthy for the league to have 1 year where it's just like, it's going to be Thunder Cavs this year. Are the markets that big? No. But is the basketball going to be good? Absolutely. Like, I think the league needs to get in the habit. I do love basketball. Like, why am I here?
I do too. Bill and I had this exact conversation yesterday where we were like, if it's OKC and Cavs, you and I and Bill will be thrilled. We'll watch basketball. We'll be so happy to watch that series. You know who won't be? A lot of casuals. A lot of casuals would not be thrilled with that.
But I think we're not in the 80s anymore where you can reasonably expect either the Lakers or the Celtics to make the finals every year. That's not the NBA anymore. Like, in the age of parity, you would expect smaller market teams to make it to the finals more often. I think the NBA needs to get better at propping those teams up, as opposed to just pointing at the famous guys and saying, like, we need them every year. Like, no, you need to be 100%. Able to make it work with these teams that fans don't know as much about. Why don't they know as much about them? Because you're not promoting them as much. So let's get the most fun basketball matchup in here, and we'll figure out how to sell these guys. So 2, 3, 4 years down the line, we're not worried about a really fun series like this.
Well, independent of all of this, that's not really the Thunder's problem. The Thunder don't really care about any of that. They've just done a really good job, a masterful job at putting together what should be a juggernaut moving forward. Celtics, same deal. They obviously won the championship last year. Brad Stevens, and a lot of people don't know about Mike Zarin, who's been the lieutenant there for a long time, but I was desperate for the Sixers to steal him away at multiple points. They never did. He likes it in Boston, but he's the lieutenant in Boston and was under Danny Ainge as well. They've done a really good job. If there's any problem with the Celtics, it's that they're selling the team and they're going to have to pay Kristaps, and the window probably closes sooner than later on this thing because they're going to be too expensive to keep together.
Yeah, you just never know with ownership. I think if Wickersbeck was still going to own the team, like, you could argue for them at number one without knowing who the owner is going to be. I didn't think I could. Now, Porzingis is probably gone after next year, and Drew Holiday is getting older. I fully trust Brad Stevens maybe it takes a year, maybe it takes 2 years to adjust this thing on the fly, make some sort of move, and have them back in contention pretty quickly afterward. Like, Tatum and Brown are still relatively young. Derek White's a little older than people think, but he's not old, and he's on a pretty reasonable contract. So, the team's going to look a little different in 1 or 2 years, but this front office has done so good at, finding, like, in their prime NBA players who are undervalued that I trust they're going to figure it out in some way.
You mean like when their conference rivals, the Milwaukee Bucks, move on from Drew Holiday and then Drew Holiday just falls into their lap? Something like that? Is that maybe what you're referring to?
Yeah, before the show, we were talking about all the luck that the Lakers have, and we'll get to them a little bit. That's a pretty, like, Red Auerbach-esque stroke
ridiculous
of luck for the Celtics.
You could probably imagine how many expletives were said in my household that day. San Antonio Spurs were the other team in this tier, nearly flawless. I'm glad you threw them in here because the amount of picks that they've compiled alongside Wemby, and then De'Aaron Fox puts his hand up and decides, hey, I want out. And they figure out a way to get De'Aaron Fox without offloading Stephon Castle, who I think is going to be a star, or even Devin Vassell. Like, the Spurs have done a masterful job here, like really setting Wemby up, provided that he's healthy, knock wood, moving forward.
John, I'm going to take it a step further. Like 9 months ago, they made a trade with the Spurs, or with the Kings and the Bulls, where they got a 2031 unprotected swap from the Kings. 8-9 months later, the Kings are trading them their best player and somehow can't get that pick swap back. That's amazing to me. That's incredible negotiation. Now, I think the Spurs have pretty intentionally looked at the Kings and looked at the Bulls and said, oh, we found our two suckers. Let's keep trading with them. But it's worked out well for them. I mean, they're set up, assuming Victor Wembanyama can stay healthy moving forward. That's obviously a big risk given the blood clot. They're set up to start contending in the relatively near future. And as long as Wemby is there and healthy, they'll be in pretty good shape to keep contending, right? The way they've set this up is they kind of have this core now with these young guys and with Thoughts and with Wemby. And then when that group starts to get expensive 4 or 5 years down the line, they have all of these pick swaps under the theory that one of them is going to hit, and they'll be able to add another core young guy then. And if they have to cycle 1 or 2 guys out, so be it.
Oh, I'm glad you brought that up because in this past draft, they get Stephon Castle at 4. They hit on that. They had a pick at 8. And I thought they should have used it. And instead, it ended up being Rob Dillingham, who ends up in Minnesota in exchange for, I believe it's a 2031 Minnesota.
2031 unprotected, 2030 swap, top 1 protected.
Yeah, which is a great bit of business. Like, just little, not even little moves like that, but just like really functional, professional, thought out moves like that, where I was thinking, oh yeah, they should take Rob Dillingham. Like, that would be a nice little backcourt, him and Stephon Castle, and you'll just grow those guys together. And they were like, no, we've got other ideas. And their other ideas were much better than just taking the pick. So kudos to the San Antonio Spurs. All right, that's your first tier. Your second tier here. This is where I start to have some issues with you. Tier 2, we trust the track record, and it's only one team. Go ahead.
The Miami Heat. Now, I understand, and like Bill and I talked about this somewhat recently on the show, and Bill thought the Heat should be lower. My argument would be They've been consistently one of the smartest teams in the NBA for 30 years, and they're one of only two teams to make the finals twice in the last half decade, right? Like the last year and a half have been pretty concerning, and we can get into that. But the
That's what I'm
track
talking
record
about.
is so good that I had to give them some degree of deference in where I rank them.
Yeah, I understand like the history there, but there have been significant cracks in Heat culture armor, right? I mean, like what happened with the Jimmy Butler situation was Pat Riley got his back up and he mishandled that thing. And over the offseason, he should have traded Jimmy Butler. At the very least, he should have traded him after he went on his rant about just shut up and play. And if you're not playing in the playoffs, and I don't want to hear from you, because if you're going to say something like that, and you're also not going to pay him, you have to anticipate that you're going to have problem child Jimmy Butler on your hands. And that's exactly what happened.
I agree, but I'll say this. I think the Jimmy Butler situation you could kind of write off as a quirk of Pat Riley. The one that I find almost more concerning was the Terry Rozier trade from last year, where they
Yeah.
give up a pretty valuable first round pick that has a chance to be unprotected to get a player that's like not really been rotation level for them.
Do you know
That's
what
the
that
one
was?
that makes me think like the player evaluation now has declined a little bit.
Okay. So yes, I totally agree with that. Although we should give them credit for finding Tyler Hero with the 13th pick and Bam with the 14th pick. However, that was hubris. That's what the Terry Rozier pick or move was. That was them going, we're the Heat culture. The Eastern Conference isn't any good. Let's get the best available guard that we think is the best available that we've identified, and bring him in and put him with Jimmy, and we'll have some more scoring, and we're going to make a run to the conference finals again. That was hubris. And this is why I think that the Heat are too high.
No, I think that's entirely fair, and I'll put it this way. If they're in the same spot that they are right now, say a year from now or in the summer of 2026, that's when I think you can really start to move the Heat down. But what I'll say here is every time we think the Heat are down, they've pulled a rabbit out of the hat, right? Like
Yeah.
when they got Jimmy Butler, people forget just how bleak that roster situation was when it was like Kelly Olynyk and Deion Waiters and all these guys on big contracts from that team that went 41-41 but had that huge second half. I just am not ready to dismiss them entirely. The track record is way too good. And there are too many other smart people in that front office. Like you mentioned Mike Zarin with the Celtics. I'll bring up Andy Ellisberg with the Heat, who's like
Sure.
the cap genius of our
Yeah.
time, the guy who's like pioneered most of the tricks that have now become like standard for smart front offices. So again, if you want to talk about
That's
the
fair.
update in a year, I'm willing to move the Heat down. I'm deferring to the track record.
Whenever I think of Andy, I think of like the Beautiful Mind meme where he's just got a grease pencil and he's writing equations on a window somewhere as it rains outside. You're right. That is an asset that I think a lot of people don't understand, like how valuable that is. Not to mention South Beach in and of itself being an asset. Still, he's slightly too high for me. All right, quick break, and then we'll continue with our updated front office rankings on the other side. We're moving into tier 3, which is the keep up the good work tier. We'll try to do the same on the other side. This is Beyond the Arc.
Gives it to Jenkins for the championship. A 16 beats a 1. From sweet to elite to the Final Four.
All right, welcome back to Beyond the Arc. A reminder to get us wherever you find your favorite podcast. Please download, subscribe, leave a review, and then on Spotify, if you look below the play button on the Spotify app in full screen mode, you can leave us a comment or a question on the show. All right, tier 3, keep up the good work. We've got the Jazz, the Grizz, the Cavs. This is a big group. You have the Knicks in here and the Rockets. You want to start with the Jazz? Dealer Danny always merits a mention.
Yeah, this was the one that I got the most pushback on, which was the Jazz at number 5. My argument would be that, like with the Heat, Danny Ainge has a 15, 20-year track record, something like that. I'm not going to wipe that away because they've been bad for a few years. Now, the one thing you can kind of say is they didn't get bad enough quickly enough, and I probably would have traded Lauri Markkanen. But that's another team that stacked so many picks. They're going to have another really good one this year, and I just generally trust that when the dust settles in 2 or 3 years and they've actually decided, like, okay, we have a young core now, we have a group that we can move forward with, they're going to start winning. So out of that group, like, do you have a big problem with the Jazz at number 5? Do you think somebody who's winning now should be higher? I have one that I think with a month or so of hindsight, I might move up.
So I don't have a problem with the Jazz being in this group. I think I'd probably have them lower just because the Grizzlies are just so professional. Kobe Altman really did a good job of putting that team together and convincing Donovan Mitchell to stay. Leon Rose, we can get to the Knicks in a second. And then the Rockets, I think, probably need to be a little bit higher just because they've been so good. But like with Danny, as you mentioned, the track record there is really long. He nailed it on the Rudy and the Donovan Mitchell trades. We'll see what all of this turns into. Larry Markkinen didn't get moved on because he decided that he wanted a functional 1-year no trade clause. They gave him his new deal and he didn't sign it until after he would be ineligible to be traded this season, but he could be traded this offseason. He could be traded next season. So I'm interested to see what Danny does there. Who would you have had higher?
As I look back on it, I think Cleveland deserved to be higher. The reason I didn't rank Cleveland higher was that we just haven't seen that group succeed in the playoffs yet. And like,
fair.
I'm a big believer that we're going to get to this postseason and that group is going to do very, very well. But given they were upset by the Knicks 2 years ago. Their showing against Orlando last year wasn't great. I think you could argue that we still might go into the playoffs this year, and the 2 small guards and the 2 less than great shooting big men could cause problems. But I look at that roster up and down. I just look at everything that happens there. You know, the fines from like Dean Wade is, I think, an undrafted free agent. Ty Jerome, totally out of nowhere. Mm-hmm. That roster is so deep. It's filled pretty much every conceivable hole. The Kenny Atkinson hire was great. Now Dan Gilbert was seemingly pretty involved in that. But Dan Gilbert's money is an asset here, right? Like, they've always been willing to pay the tax. I assume they'll be willing to pay the tax for this group. So I just look at them and I say, like, man, what, they're 50-10? Something like that now?
Yeah.
I think I should have given that a little bit more credit.
Identifying Evan Mobley, hitting on Jarrett Allen, trading for him. The DeAndre Hunter addition at the trade deadline was a tidy bit of business. I thought that was good. The Grizzlies, I don't think, get enough credit here because they just keep hitting. Look, Ja and Jaren Jackson Jr. were high first-round picks, fine. But like Desmond Bane and Santi Aldama at 30 in back-to-back drafts, and then Jalen Wells in a rookie group that was not good, getting a guy who's a solid rotation piece, who's been, as a rookie, like a very good player for you. And then just like other things like Brandon Clark or Scottie Pippen Jr., who was just basically a cast-off. I mean, they are a really well-run organization. Now, who knows what that translates to in the playoffs, especially with Jaren Jackson Jr.'s ankle situation being week to week. But, I just like the way that the Grizzlies go about it.
They're the best drafting team in the NBA, and they're maybe the best developing team in the NBA, which does count for a lot. The reason that I couldn't have them a little bit higher was that they haven't been able to make the finishing move yet. Like, the move that takes them from the pretty good semi-contender that's frequently adding young talent to the like genuine top of the group overall contender. I think there's a chance they do that this offseason, but like, look at all of the swings they've taken on wings that have missed, whether it was, Justice Winslow or the trade with Steven Adams and Jonas that cost them Trey Murphy potentially. Oh, they could have just drafted Trey Murphy, which is their one big draft mistake. Like, Marcus Smart was a bad trade. Eventually they have to like make that leap and make like a substantial add of some sort to jump into like tier 1 championship contender status. When they do that, I am open to moving them up in future editions. For now though, like, they've kind of just been operating as a small market team that drafts well, which is only part of the equation, which is why I didn't have them a little bit higher.
Taking that big swing and hitting on it, I think, is the same situation that the Rockets are in, where they've positioned themselves extremely well. They've got a ton of picks, a ton of cap space. I love Şengün and Thompson. They're going to be there for a long time. Depending on the night, I'm in on Jalen Green, and other nights I'm like, no. They went and identified Fred VanVleet and Dylan Brooks as solid veterans. And then, the Tari Easons and Cam Whitmores of the world don't get enough credit. And I think if Reed Shepherd was on any other team with more minutes, that would be a good hit too. But yes, they're in that same situation where they need to get like a big swing player. And that could be this summer. It could be as early as this summer.
Yeah, I think Reed Shepherd's going to be fine. I think that's something that's going to take a year or two for him to get Ime Udoka's trust. But I think he's going to end up being fine and being a solid pick at number 3. With Raphael Stone, I think this isn't something he gets enough credit for. he's extremely creative in the ways that he constructs trades. So you go back to the 2021 trade deadline when he sends PJ Tucker to the Bucks. He wants an unprotected pick from the Bucks, but they're prevented from doing so because of the Stepien rule. The interesting thing there was the reason they were prevented was because the Rockets had their pick in another year.
Yeah.
So they constructed this really interesting trade where they sidestepped the Stepien rule by sending them their own pick back. Rafael Stone has done several things like that. I really like a creative general manager, like somebody who's figuring out how to sidestep the rules to get the best possible return in deals. So I'm very optimistic about their future. I think once they make their big move, whatever it is, they're going to be in great shape.
I think so too. All right. Last one for this tier that we do need to touch on is the Knicks. I struggled with this one because on the one hand, I like what Leon Rose has done. I thought he obviously won the cat trade. No question about it. I like that he got OG by moving on from RJ and IQ. Mikal Bridges is a very good player. This is where I struggle though. 5 first-round picks for Mikal Bridges is an outrageous price, and that was a gross overpay.
Yeah, I think everything that got them to this summer was like nearly flawless, right? Like the Knicks have done, except for maybe the Celtics, a better job of identifying undervalued talent around the NBA than any other team. Like Randall goes from never an all-star to all-NBA twice with the Knicks. Brunson goes from number 2 option in Dallas to like top 8, 7 player in the NBA, something like that. You just look at their moves and they consistently find guys who are like pretty good players somewhere and then great players in New York. You know, Josh Hart's another example of that. There are guys that they don't have anymore who are examples of that, Isaiah Hartenstein. That's a really, really valuable trait for a front office to have. The reason that they're ranked where they're ranked is that we don't know how these big star swings are ultimately going to work out, right? Like they went all in for Mikal Bridges and Karl-Anthony Towns. I think given how little they gave up for Towns, that trade was probably a good idea, and it's worked thus far this year. Bridges, not quite so much. Ultimately, though, they spent all their assets, and they're probably going to end up in the same place this year that they were last year, which is losing in the second round. So I need to see it for a few more years. I need to see those star acquisitions lead to something before I'm going to push them any further. But I will say just generally, that's a very smart front office that's very thoughtful and very good at identifying talent.
That's my whole thing, right? That, yeah, I like the moves on the surface, but that overpay where they got rid of all their assets and they end up back in roughly the same spot, and they're not as good as the Cavs and they're not as good as the Celtics. And we've seen that they're not as good as Oklahoma City and a lot of these other teams. They lost to the Warriors the other night. You know, if we were doing a power ranking, I'd have them, you know, not in the top 5, outside of that, in the top 10, which is fine, but where's that get you really? All right, let's take another break. And then on the other side, I don't know why you did this to me, Sam, but next up, Tier 4, all by themselves. We're going to talk about them because we have to, because they're one of the 30 NBA teams. It's the Philadelphia 76ers. This is Beyond the Arc.
One of golf's elite courses, Quail Hollow, hosts the game's top players at the PGA Championship this May on CBS.
All right, welcome back to Beyond the Arc. Just a reminder that you can find us on YouTube at Beyond the Arc CBS. Please hit the like button, leave a comment, subscribe, and if you click on that little bell symbol, you'll get notified when we go live. All right, Tier 4, smart but unlucky. I got a question mark after that because I'm not so sure, but you've got this Philadelphia 76ers all by themselves. Make the case, and then I'll rebut.
Daryl Morey has been a general manager for 18 years, and this is going to be the first year in which he's ever gone below 500. Do you realize how insane that is? To do as well as he's done without ever tanking even once. He's made 2 very, very, let's say, iffy decisions in the last year on the Paul George deal and the Joel Embiid extension. Show me the other mistakes, because everything else looks like it's pretty good, right? Like the Quentin Grimes trade has been a home run at the deadline. Finding Yabusele, great find. Drafting Jared McCain at 16, home run. Drafting Tyrese Maxey at 21, home run. How many teams have found an all-star in the 20s? It's not a long list. Daryl Morey has done this successfully for a long, long time. I'm not going to let 2 decisions that look really bad 9 months in affect the ranking of someone who's been doing this job well for 2 decades.
All right, I want to qualify this by saying I am a huge fan of Daryl Morey and always have been for all the reasons that you just outlined. Since 2006, it was 2006 when he got hired, I'm pretty sure, by the Rockets.
Something like that.
He's been right around a top 5 general manager in the NBA. He's incredibly smart. If you spend any time talking to that guy, you know that there's a mind at work there, and he's always got a plan, and he's always got 12 others after that. I am with you 1000%. However, you can't just like sweep under the rug other than those 2 decisions, because you're making it sound like other than like just 2 random decisions that are just equal to all the other decisions. They're not. It's not. That's a false equivalency. I also want to say I would have made the same mistakes that he did. I would have given Paul George 4 for 212. I was one of the principal advocates on the show saying this is the best possible scenario for them, especially when he's coming off of a career year shooting the ball and all they have to do is sign him into cap. Absolutely. Joel Embiid, hard to get guys like that. Of course you have to extend them. Now they are 2 of the most onerous contracts in the NBA. Who knows how many games you're going to get out of Joel Embiid next year or any year. And Paul George, good luck moving that deal. Those are bad mistakes. I would have made them too, but I'm not the general manager of the Sixers.
But doesn't the fact that you would have made them too make them slightly more justifiable, right? Like, that's not a mistake like trading Luka Doncic for Anthony Davis, right? Where like,
Fair.
everybody knew in the moment that was a bad idea. The stuff that Daryl does, the ways that he missed, are ways that I'm comfortable with the GM missing. Like, Daryl Morey's whole MO as a general manager is I want stars. I am catering to stars. Everything I do is going to be about bringing in and keeping stars. If you're going to miss doing that, that's a lot better than some of the ways that other teams miss, right? They're not the Bulls where the ways in which they miss lead to winning 30 games every year.
Yeah, we'll get to the Bulls much later. But you're right about that. However, when you're missing big on stars, that also can handicap you. And now they're really tethered to 2 guys who have not looked great and might not have much utility and or availability moving forward. And that is problematic to the point where there are now growing whispers, rumors, concerns in NBA circles that, and I'm with you again, I love Daryl Morey, but there's a reason why there's been a lot of chatter about Bob Myers maybe being waiting in the wings this offseason and Josh Harris, the owner of the Sixers, kind of looking at him through the corner of his eye.
Daryl Morey's a better general manager than Bob Myers. I think that would be a downgrade. And I think if Daryl Morey was available, a lot of teams should fire whoever's running their team to hire Daryl, and we'll cover them down later in the list. So I think that would be a mistake. I think that would be a downgrade. I understand where those whispers are coming from. I also think to an extent that's based in the owner of the 76ers, Josh Harris, running the Commanders, and Bob Myers being like peripherally involved there. I think there's a good relationship there. I just think like you would be crazy not to want Daryl Morey as the general manager of your team. I will die on that hill.
Yeah, I mean, he's really smart. He is. And me playing devil's advocate doesn't change that. He's really good. It's just those 2 decisions that are like, what's going to happen now? All right. You know what? I just realized I said that the tier 4 was just the Philadelphia 76ers, smart but unlucky. I realized that was just my notes. And you actually have other teams in this tier, including the Clippers, the Nets, and the Pelicans. And I think you're right on all 3 fronts.
Yeah, I mean, you could just look at any one of them. The Clippers easily could have won a title if Kawhi and Paul George had been healthy. The Nets probably would have won a title if Kyrie and James Harden had been healthy. The Pelicans, you just never know because they were never healthy, right? But if you look at the moves they made in a vacuum, they all pretty much made sense. It's just without Zion and Ingram being healthy ever, they never got to bear the fruits. With the Pelicans, that's the one I got a little bit of pushback on, but I think if you look at how well they drafted with Herb Jones in the 2nd round and Trey Murphy at 17, Alvarado undrafted, I think Yves Missi is going to be a big hit for them down the line. I just think that's a very smart team that's generally been restricted by Zion's health. Their ownership concerns me a little bit. I don't know if they'll ever pay the tax, but I generally look at David Griffin and I say he knows what he's doing.
1000%. Griff is a really smart dude, which is why I think as Zion starts to play, okay, actually, you know what? I don't know. I'm going to ask you. The more that Zion has played recently, the better he's looked. And there is a camp that thinks, oh, this is fantastic. He's out the door this offseason. Do you think that that's the case, that he gets moved, if not even this offseason, then sooner rather than later? Or do you think that Griff and the Pelicans talk themselves into, well, wait a minute, we already have the guy. Maybe he's going to be healthy now.
Well, the trend with the Pelicans has always been one star exits, another star enters, and then the cycle continues. I'm going to be very curious to see how they do on lottery night. If they get Cooper Flag, like Zion should be gone like 24 hours later because they play the same position. If they finish 2 or 3 and they can get another foundational guy, I think it makes sense to explore it. Sure. I mean, they're clearly pretty deep at forward. And, Misi is not as valuable at center playing next to Zion than he would be next to, say, a spacing 4. If they wind up picking 6, I think as a franchise in that market, it gets very hard to move forward without any sort of foundational star guy. So let's see how they do on lottery night. I certainly think it would be justified in trading Zion. Like, the risk reward calculus for Zion it makes more sense for a different team. Like, say you're Charlotte, hypothetically, and you haven't spent the last 5 years doing the will he, won't he be healthy dance. Then maybe you take the swing because, like, what else are you doing, right? With the Pelicans, I don't know how many years you can spend waiting for something that's never come. So I do think it does make some sense for them to explore a trade. It's just, what can you get for a guy who's never been healthy? I don't know. I'd be curious to find out. He's averaging 27, 7, and 5 on 65% true shooting in the last 6 weeks or so. Like, when that guy's on the floor, he's an MVP candidate.
That is somehow a better scenario than the Sixers that I just mentioned with Joel Embiid, who is actually an MVP and who is never healthy, which is my problem with that deal. Before we move on from this tier, I just want to say the Nets and Sean Marks, it didn't work out with KD and Kyrie. I think every team, if you had that cap space and KD and Kyrie put their hands up and go, hey, we want to come and play in Brooklyn or wherever your franchise is located, you go, yes, KD and Kyrie, we would like you to come and join us. And yeah, sure, we can land James Harden, and wouldn't that work out? Didn't work out. However, rebooting that thing on the fly, Sean Marks has done a really good job with that. We mentioned Mikal Bridges getting 5 firsts for that. They control their draft again. They hit on some really nice role players. They've been good drafters. Look, Brooklyn is still a destination. So I think Sean Marks is a smart guy, and he's done a good job with a bad situation.
I completely agree. And the big complaint about him, at least among Nets fans right now, is that they're too good. And when your biggest complaint about a GM is that he hired a coach who was too smart and they're not losing enough games, like, I think you're probably in a decent position.
Yeah, and I want to thank them for that, by the way, because that could impact the Sixers draft position as well. All right, tier 5, don't rest on your laurels. We've got the Raptors, the Warriors, we got the Warriors and the Raptors.
Yeah, the Warriors, I think when I revisit this list over the summer, the Jimmy Butler trade has been such a success thus far, and I assume it's going to continue being a success, that I think there's a chance that they climb, like, significantly up this list. But remember, Bob Myers is gone. Jerry West is gone. Mm-hmm. A lot of the people that helped build that dynasty are now gone. Like, I mean, I'm going to throw out a name that as a general manager didn't do well. Travis Schlenk was the guy who got a lot of the credit for drafting Draymond, and he left, right? He left to run the Hawks, and then he got fired, and he's, I think, with the Wizards now. Like, there are a lot of the people who made their success possible that are just no longer there, and we don't know as much yet about the Dunleavy, Kirk Lakeup, regime here. So my thing was, I generally trust Joe Lakeup as an owner. I think there's a lot of organizational credit that's deserved here, but given the short track record, I couldn't have them super high on the list.
Yeah, no, I think that this is about right. I don't know how much of it was, hey, they lucked into it because of circumstances with Jimmy, or as opposed to, they just identified a guy who really works, but so far so good. And yeah, producer Aaron, who's a Warriors fan, points out that the drafts look good so far. I thought Pajemski was a good pick. Trace Jackson Davis, Quentin Post, those are useful players. So far so good. I want to hit on the Raptors because I'm a big fan of Masai Ujiri. He built a championship in Toronto. Toronto, amazing city, not an NBA destination. Won a championship, full marks on that. OG goes out. He brings in RJ and IQ. He drafts Scotty Barnes. He picks up Brandon Ingram, who there wasn't, I don't think, a ton of market for, but he's got a vision here. He's got a theory of the case. Jakob Poeltl, Grady Dick, and you flagged Jamal Sheed. I like him too. What do we think about this group? Because I think, this year, obviously, they're not trying to win. The other night against the Magic, they literally tried to tank out of that game and ended up winning it against, because Jacoby had a 3-pointer and ended up winning a game that they didn't want to win. However, this group that he's put together, he clearly thinks they can be like relevant or slightly above that in the Eastern Conference next year. I'm just not entirely sure I buy it.
Yeah, Masai Ujiri, like, go back 2019, 2020, had like a limitless credit with the league, right? He's somehow spent almost all of it at this point. They are another team that like really badly need a successful lottery night because the way this roster is set up, it feels like it caps out at like 46, 47 wins unless they hit a home run with this pick, whoever it is. That's kind of their upside. It feels like they had a team with one guard, a million wings, and like one big, and they tore it down. So 18 months later, they could be a team with one guard, a million wings, and one big, right? Like, I don't know what was accomplished in letting Van Vliet go and trading Anunoby and trading Siakam because they're kind of right back where they started. So
they're younger.
Such a strong track record in building that champion that I had to have him at least near the middle of the list. I have some real questions about the overall plan where they're at now.
Yeah, I do too. I think that what you can say about it is they rebuilt what they had previously and they got younger, I guess, and cheaper. But yes, I'm with you. I believe in Masai, but I'm not sure. They need to hit a home. You're right. This draft is the thing. Tier 6, fine, just fine. You've got Orlando Magic, the Indiana Pacers in this tier. I think this is probably right. I mean, look, they hit on Paolo and Franz, but they're like, and to a lesser extent, Jalen Suggs, although now he's out for the season. And they identified Jamal Mosley, who I think is a very good coach. Man, are they desperate for offense.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think if they trade for Anthony Simons over the summer, I know it's the internet's favorite fake trade. The offense gets a lot better, and like now we're talking about a really promising young team. They have a clear theory where they just want to draft big, skilled wings, and that's fine. But a theory is not a roster, and they actually need to convert that theory into a roster moving forward. Until they do, then they're going to be middle of the pack.
Yeah. The Indiana Pacers, my note here was all caps. They made the Eastern Conference Finals, ! This is a case for just being a really good, competent organization. Okay, Tyrese Halliburton was an Olympian, and he's an all-star. They went and got Pascal Siakam. Those are two good players. But for the most part, this is a team that's greater than the sum of their parts. They don't have a super duper star on this team, and they just keep being like just, a good professional basketball organization.
They made the Eastern Conference Finals because the Bucks and the Knicks got hurt. Like, I'm not giving them credit for that specifically. And they have an owner that's like pretty notorious within the NBA
for sure
being frugal.
But that we're talking about front offices. So that actually, I think, plays to the front office's favor that they have been handcuffed a little bit financially, and they are still, a good, tough out. And you look, they're never going to get out of the Eastern Conference, but they're the Indiana Pacers.
Okay, John, I don't have the list in front of me. I think the next team is the Lakers. If the Lakers are not the next team, they're coming up very closely. Somebody suggested something to me after they saw that list that really made me think, which is with the Lakers, say you're grading a front office and you give them a C. You can get a C by getting C's on everything, or you can get a C by getting A's on half of your moves and F's on half of your moves. That's where the Lakers are. With the Pacers, I feel like they are the quintessential get a C on everything.
Yeah.
Where, like, everything they do, it makes sense. It's not too crazy. The price is not out of hand. Yep. Like, I understand the logic behind everything they do, but man, is the upside limited in the way they've built for, like, the last 15, 20 years, like, long
100%.
time. That's sort of where I'm at with them, where I think they're smart. I just don't think that they're like an especially high upside organization.
They have a low ceiling, but a high floor is my point. And I guess I'm more focused on the floor than you are. And you're more focused on the ceiling. All right. Tier 6, the single hardest team to rank, the Minnesota Timberwolves. This one is tough because I think universally everybody looks at Tim Connolly and goes, man, he's awesome at his job. I mean, he built the Nuggets and then he went to the Timberwolves and he had them within a sniff of, last year they almost ended up as the one. I mean, like, he's a really smart general manager, but also they've got this ownership fight and the Karl Anthony Towns trade, even though they did it because of fiduciary purposes, quite obviously the Knicks won that trade. And now Julius Randle might pick up his $30 million player option. So they might be stuck with him for another second. Explain why you found it. That's why I found it probably about right.
Yeah. I mean, Tim Connolly built the Nuggets. You get a lot of credit for that. He built an NBA champion. The Rudy Gobert trade, we've kind of gone back and forth and back again. Where I land now is like, not worst trade in NBA history like we thought 2 years ago, but pretty clearly a mistake, right? Like if they had just had Walker Kessler and had all of their picks, plus they could probably still have Karl Anthony Towns in that scenario, they'd probably feel a little bit better about their long-term position. So that confuses me. The ownership situation, Glenn Taylor was a bad owner for 30 years.
Yeah.
But there was that reporting from Woj last year that if A-Rod and Laurie had gotten the team, they were going to take them below the luxury tax this year, which was basically impossible without like utterly gutting the entire roster. So like I have fears about that ownership situation. Something that people don't realize, Tim Connolly had I was about to say player option, GM option in his contract last summer. He ultimately decided to push it a year down the line so he can get out of his contract again this summer. It's a little concerning to me when the GM is not talking about sticking around long term, right? Like when the GM's future is in some sort of doubt, when it's not like, oh, he might get fired, that raises red flags for me. So I really didn't know what to do with the Timberwolves. I tried to split the difference and say, like, they might be smart and they might have real problems.
I think both of those things are true, right? I mean, like they can both be true at the same time where you think, okay, well, I think Tim Connolly is smart, but long-term, there could be various issues between the ownership group, and again, what you're going to do, moving forward. So, all right. So we've got the Lakers here in tier 7. And some other teams, the Pistons, the Hornets, the Wizards. But I want to talk about the Lakers, and you have them. They're playing a different game. My whole thing, and I want you to make the case for this because I get that Rob Pelinka. Not a lot of people are going to give Rob Pelinka credit here. He did win a championship, and oh, by the way, he just traded for Luka. And you might say, well, no. Nico gave Luka away. Whatever, he's still got Luka.
All right, clear the lane, John. I'm about to cook. The Lakers under Rob Pelinka have been very heavily defined by 3 acquisitions. The first was LeBron James, who is a Laker because he wanted to live in Los Angeles. The second is Anthony Davis, who is a Laker because Rich Paul wanted him to be a Laker and he made that happen. The third is Luka Doncic, who is a Laker because Nico Harrison gave him to the Lakers. Now, you could argue that they didn't screw those situations up, and I think that's fair. Like, there is something to be said for sealing the deal on the obvious move. Other front offices haven't done that, right? Miami didn't get Damian Lillard. You go up and down this list. The Lakers didn't get Paul George years ago when he was begging to go there. So, yes, I understand there is credit to be gleaned from not screwing it up. But, man, are the misses really, really egregious. The Russell Westbrook trade, one of the worst trades in NBA history. Choosing Talen Horton-Tucker and Kendrick Nunn over Alex Caruso, one of the most apocalyptic free agent decisions ever. Hiring Darvin Ham, not great. Pinning everything that went wrong with Westbrook on Frank Vogel, not great. There are just a lot of misses here that lead me to believe that when left to its own devices, this front office's ability to form a plan and actually build a roster that makes sense as opposed to just accumulating talent is lackluster. Now, that being said, they have done such a good job of finding talent in unexpected places that you kind of have to give them credit for that. Austin Reeves, undrafted free agent. Alex Caruso, undrafted free agent. They've drafted really well in the 20s. They've drafted really well in the second round. Max Christie, look at how he's playing for Dallas.
Yep.
He's played very, very well. Even if Jeannie Buss doesn't spend as much as Steve Ballmer, worth noting they've been in the tax 4 years in a row now. That's more spending than other teams have. I think more than anything, the Lakers are defined by star moves. The star moves tend not to be in the control of Rob Pelinka. If this front office was operating in Utah, they don't get LeBron, they don't get Anthony Davis, and they don't get Luka. So I can't have them ranked, in the top of this list, but I also can't rank them at the bottom either because of how well they've gotten, they've managed it for the stars and because of how well they've drafted and developed. So they're kind of in their own worlds. John, what do you think?
They are. Yeah, no, I mean, I went back and forth too, because you make a lot of good points on some of these swings were obvious misses, but Austin Reeves went from nobody knew who the hell Austin Reeves was to a guy who was just at the end of the bench to a guy who all of a sudden was in the rotation to a guy who all of a sudden was a starter to a guy who all of a sudden is a critical piece. That's not nothing. And they got off of D'Lo and they bring in Dorian Finney-Smith, who, since January 15, the Lakers have been humming. And part of that is because Jared Vanderbilt came back. And part of that is because Dorian Finney-Smith and he are together two really good, useful defenders on a team where they need that defense, right? So it's not all bad. I will say probably the most important component here is just like the Lakers aura and being in Los Angeles and people wanting to go there. And they've been lucky for a long time in the same way that, who were some of the other teams that we were mentioning or were consistently lucky, like the Celtics.
Celtics
right? I mean,
are the other one that comes to mind.
yeah, I mean, the Lakers are the Lakers for a reason. So, and they got Luka, and now they're set up for the foreseeable future. All right, tier 8 is off to a good start, but barely any track record. I think you have the Pistons at 20, the Hornets at 21, the Wizards at 22. I absolutely agree with you on the Pistons, who have been way ahead of the curve. I'm not sure I agree with you on the Hornets and the Wizards.
Well, they're just in the beginning stages of a tank, right? Like, what I would ultimately say is I think they have the right idea. The Hornets just trading their veterans for picks. Good call. Totally agree. The Wizards just tanking as aggressively as the team can tank. That's what I'd be doing. It's too early to say where this is going to go. Again, I just think they're off to a good start. The Pistons are the one team in this tier where I could see them having like one successful offseason this summer and like, boom, move up 10 spots, something like that. Because they have the star in Cade. They've gotten a lot of the supporting moves right. They're on the right track to the point where, like, get the next year or two right, and they're truly contending in the near future.
Cade Cunningham is an absolute superstar, and I wanted to take your temperature on this. I might have already even asked you. It could be Bill. I don't remember. Are we about, because I totally agree with you that next year the Pistons could take another leap, and you'd be like, holy hell, where did the Pistons come from? Because of Cade Cunningham. Are we in a spot where Cade's about to leapfrog Ant in terms of like one of the better young domestic players? Like,
I hadn't thought about that, but it's an interesting way to put it. So I did an episode with John about this. Maybe it was like 2 months ago, I think, around New Year's. I wrote a story outlining like my predictions for the rest of the decade in the NBA. And one that I had about Cade was that he is going to be, for the next half decade, what Shai Gilgeous-Alexander was for the last one, where you have him in there now as like a lower end all-star, but I think in 5 years we're talking MVP candidate. Like, I love what he's done so much. He and Ant are very, very different players. And I think like if they were in the same conference, it would be a really fun rivalry where you have these guys that like play so differently but are in the same age group, are fighting for that title of best young American player, both have like iffy Midwestern cities and iffy Midwestern rosters, at least at the moment. So I hadn't thought about that, but it's an interesting point. I'm not quite ready to go there yet because I think Anthony Edwards has been so good. His roster just hasn't been there with him, but I'm not dismissing it.
I'm pretty close to being ready to go there. And the reason why I made the Ant comp was because of the whole American thing and everybody's trying to identify who's the next great American player, whatever. I'm so glad you brought up SGA because I have a friend of mine who is a Detroit Pistons fan, bless his heart. Times have not been good for the Pistons for a very, 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 very long time. And now the Pistons are good. And I was talking to him about, him being happy about that and how good Cade is. And I referred to Cade as kind of like slightly discounted, but bigger SGA. And this guy who loves the Pistons was like, whoa, that's maybe a little step too far. I don't know that it is.
I think the basic premise is similar of the like bigger guards that have both power and finesse that like, I think SGA is a better athlete. I think Cade is a little bit craftier, or at least is craftier than where SGA was at this point.
Cade's bigger,
I think
stronger,
it's
more
an
physical
comparison.
Yeah. We're both in on Cade. All right. Tier 9. This one was interesting. Tier 9 is title winners with questionable methods. We are now at the Milwaukee Bucks at 23 and the Denver Nuggets at 24. And I stared at this for a long time and I was like, I guess this is about right. I mean, John Horst did build a championship winner and he identified the franchise identified Giannis, but they also traded Drew and picked up Dame, and that ended up being disastrous. Dame has had a good season, but Drew was a better fit. And then the Nuggets, I think I'd flip these. I'd have the Nuggets ahead of the Bucks.
I'm looking at my first draft, and I had the Nuggets ahead of the Bucks on my first draft. So there you go. I think with the Bucks, they've really like the thing they've done well is whenever they've needed to get Giannis to extend, they've been able to make the big swing to show him like, hey, like this is a place you can win. Whether or not that's actually true is almost irrelevant for the time being because they've gotten buy-in from their megastar, which is the most important thing. It worked out very well with Drew. It's a little bit more questionable with Dame. The issue is, like, they've done a really questionable job of building the supporting cast around those guys. They haven't really developed talent, right? They're not drafting. They've given away all their picks. They're not finding the undrafted guys. I guess AJ Green, they sort of have. Andre Jackson is like good defender, not really a great overall player
He's so
yet.
athletic. Why is he not better?
I couldn't tell you yet. I just look at the Bucks and I say, like, it feels like they're kind of just remortgaging the house, refinancing their mortgage every few years. And remember, they didn't, or at least the current administration did not draft Giannis. That was John Hammond.
That's why I said the team.
Currently in Orlando. So I just look there and I say, like, how much credit do I want to give you for just trading all of your picks every few years? Like, you did win a championship. You won that championship because Kevin Durant's foot was a little bit too big, but you won a championship nonetheless. It ultimately just came down to the fact that over the last few years, I've really lost faith in this front office's ability to, make this work for the next stretch of Giannis's career. What happens when Brook Lopez ages out, when Dame ages out? Is Giannis going to be okay there? Are they going to be able to put a decent team around him? And my answer is probably not.
I'll tell you what happens, and the answer is before Brook Lopez ages out and before Dame ages out, I think well in advance of that, Giannis is going to look around and go, I can win anywhere. Why don't I go to a team where I can really maximize my odds and have a much better roster and supporting cast? Because it's not in Milwaukee, which is why I would have the Nuggets ahead, because I had some questions about what Calvin Booth did this offseason when KCP walked and they went, Christian Brown is going to be just fine. And I went, are you sure about that? And also they decided Russell Westbrook was going to be a useful piece. And I said, are you sure about that? And it turns out they were right on both fronts.
Christian Brown starting was not the issue. The problem was losing Christian Brown from the bench, because that bench remains a major issue. And look, Russell Westbrook has been exactly what they've needed in the regular season. He's been an injection of life, an injection of playmaking. The energy is great. When they get to the playoffs, I suspect they're going to have a lot of the same issues with Russell Westbrook that other teams that have employed Russell Westbrook have had. So talk to me when they get to the playoffs and he's not playing them off the floor. I think just the reluctance on their part to invest in veterans outside of the core has been a major problem. It's a big issue when your coach and your GM are not on the same page. And clearly that's the case in Denver. So when you factor in that, plus the relative cheapness of ownership, I don't think that's a great overall organization. I think that's an organization that had one generational hit on a second-round pick. And the stuff after that has been up and down.
I was at the Ringer when they finally made the move to trade Nurk to Portland and fully go with Joker. And I went back and read the piece that I wrote at the time. And it was like, I was looking at his stats were like, Joker's stats were almost like cute and quaint at the time compared to what they are now. And like, just what an amazing pick that was. But that was Tim Connelly. All right, going on to tier 10, I have real questions. Portland Trailblazers at 25, Atlanta Hawks at 26. The Blazers for me, I think I had the same exact questions that you did, which is why are Jeremy Grant, Robert Williams, and DeAndre Ayton still on that team? I didn't mind the Denny Advia pickup. I wanted to ask you, where are you on Toumani Camara? Because I think they really hit on him.
I think they really hit on him, but I almost feel like, I hate to call that an accident, but like, if anybody knew that Toumani Camara was this good, he would not have been in that trade. So my thought is like, home run of an acquisition. Great job. But I look at the overall vision here, and given how unsuccessfully they tanked, I'm sort of looking here and saying I am very nervous that this is a team that caps out at like 45 wins.
As presently constituted, probably do, but maybe they make other moves, right? I mean,
well,
I think some of the, who are the young
agree.
pieces that you like on that? I mean, like, can Toumani Camara be, I don't know, new Amin Thompson? Like,
let's calm down a little bit. I think he's a very, very good defender. They've kind of done this in reverse, where normally when you rebuild, you start by tanking for the star, you get the star, and then you fill in the stuff around them.
Sure.
They have done a really good job of finding the role players where like Camara would be a great fit around the star. Klingon, Denny Avdia, like these are all guys that would be really useful if they had a star to orbit around, but they don't. And the way it's trending now, unless they get very lucky in a lottery, might not have access to that guy because remember, it's Portland. How long was Damian Lillard trying to get some other veteran star to come join him there? Never could do it because stars don't want to live in Portland. You have to draft them. And given the way that they've built, holding on to Jeremy Grant for too long, holding on to the centers for too long, making the Denny Avdija trade, which in a vacuum made sense, but also made them a lot better and hurt their tank. I don't know if they're going to get the main centerpiece guy. And without that guy, the whole thing kind of falls apart.
Where are you on the guards between Scoot and Shaden and Anthony?
I think Scoot has improved significantly this year. The shot is still so inconsistent that
really
I have very serious questions. And the other thing, the shot is what it is. Amen Thompson has no shot whatsoever and
doesn't matter.
Great. And I have no real doubts about him as a long-term guy. I don't want to say the basketball IQ, but the shoot versus pass IQ, the on the floor game, quick decision making. I think it's gotten better for Scoot, but it's a long way from where it needs to be if you're going to be a primary ball handler. Sharp is an insane athlete. I don't know if that's translated to being the level of basketball player that he should be. And Simon should be on the Orlando Magic. I'm not entertaining this conversation for the Blazers.
All right, fair enough. I don't want to belabor some of these teams. We can get into the Hawks if you want to. I think the more important conversation comes in at tier 11 where we go, I can't defend what they're doing, which I think you nailed it on the title. Because in this tier, you've got 4 teams that are left. At 27, the Dallas Mavericks, 28, the Suns, the Sacramento Kings at 29, and the Bulls at 30. I think you nailed it. The Bulls are easily the worst run front office in the NBA. We can get to them in a second. I don't know how you didn't have the Mavericks just slightly ahead of them just because of the whole Luka situation.
Yeah,
it's tough to defend.
So I just had a story go up basically saying that the Mavericks should already trade Anthony Davis because the situation has gotten that bleak with Kyrie Irving carrying his ACL. And I didn't intend to write this as I was planning it. But once I got there, I got to the point where Nico Harrison would never trade Anthony Davis because he's bet his entire career on Anthony Davis, essentially.
Yeah.
And then I thought about it, and I thought, well, I'm writing the story of what the Mavericks should do, not what Nico Harrison should do. And if doing what's right for the Mavericks is an impediment to Nico Harrison, then they should just fire Nico Harrison and do what's right for the team. And at this point, this isn't even a basketball concern anymore. That fan base is in open revolt. I have never seen anything like this. Where they're at right now, they have a chance to lose a generation of fans. Not only are they, totally falling apart, not only do they owe out all of their picks. John, have you looked at who they owe their picks to?
No.
They owe those picks. In 2028, goes to the Thunder. 2020,
right.
Goes to the Spurs. 2029 goes to the Rockets. 2030
goes
to the Thunder. Those are 2 teams in their state.
In their own state.
The team that is geographically closest to them in the entire league. Fans in that region are going to flock to these other teams. They're not going to have a fan base in 10 years. I look at this, for all 4 of these teams, and we can get into them specifically however much you want to, I would say all 4 of them need an ownership change and need a front office change. You could maybe get away with only one, but I would recommend 2 if it were up to me. In Dallas specifically, that fan base is never going to heal as long as Nico Harrison is there.
It's really rough, and it's crazy too because has there been talk about a 180 from last season when Nico Harrison went and got Gafford and PJ Washington and everybody went, is that really it? That's what you're doing? And it really supercharged that team. They changed their identity. They became much better defensively. They ended up going on a finals run. Everybody, including me, and especially me, was lauding Nico Harrison for being a really smart, shrewd general manager. And then the wheels absolutely come off in every conceivable way, which is, by the way, why I know that you don't like the Kings. We can get into the Kings in a second. I would have the Kings ahead of the Mavericks and the Suns because the Suns, all right, look, at least the Suns can unplug KD or Booker when this thing really gets bad, even though it's been bad. But Ishbia and James Jones have absolutely no respect or regard for the draft at all, or draft picks or draft capital or assets or whatever. And on top of that, even if they did, they traded for Brad Beal and left the no trade clause intact, which I think is absolute malpractice. All right. You trade Luka, that's malpractice of the first order, but of a very close order. All the other stuff that the Suns did,
So the way I described the Suns in the story was that they're the team with the least foresight in the NBA. The Bradley Beal thing is a perfect example of that. We'll never need to trade Bradley Beal. He's going to be
So
perfect
bad.
here.
It's
Well, a
so
year and a
bad.
half later, look what happens. We're going to trade our 2031 unprotected pick for 3 bad picks. Well, I guess if that helps us get Jimmy Butler, you could kind of talk your way into it. Wait, they didn't get Jimmy Butler? Wait, all they did was dump Yusuf Nurkic? And they give up a 2031 first-round pick unprotected, essentially to do that? Like, if you just look at the moves they make, none of them seem to be thinking any further ahead than like the next 6 months. And now they're going to move into this offseason and like, I think they're really depending on getting a haul for Kevin Durant. I don't know that a haul for Kevin Durant at his age and his injury history exists anymore. I think they'll get a good return. I don't know if it'll be a great one. So, I mean, when the general manager basically goes on the record, as James Jones did with Kevin Arnovitz a few years ago at ESPN, saying, I don't care about the draft, or whatever the exact quote was, that's a huge red flag for me. I give the Suns a lot of credit for being ambitious. Not a lot of owners would spend the way that Ishbia has. Not a lot of owners are as committed to winning as Ishbia seems to be. They've just gone about it in the totally wrong way.
Yeah, but I mean, that's such new owner syndrome, right? Where he came in and he like it wasn't just James Jones that said he didn't care about the draft. Matt Ishbia, the second that he came in, said the same thing. He's like, if you care about the 2031 draft, you're not going to like the Suns. Okay, well, you're not going to like the Suns now, and you're not going to like them in 2031 either, I guess.
So new owner syndrome typically is like one bad trade, and it's usually like, oh wow, they gave up 2 first-round picks for that 7th man. Like that's not great. New owner syndrome for Matt Ishbia might be like, you've ruined the Suns for the next 7 years.
I know.
Like that's the worst case.
Really bad.
That's like not other than Ted Stepien, who's in a class by himself and was so bad that he literally has a rule named after him. That might be the worst case of new owner syndrome we've ever seen.
That's why I'd have the Suns behind the Kings. I know that you didn't like them rebooting. You know, they're now Chicago West with Levine and DeMar DeRozan and Sabonis. And where's that really get you? You know, you've got, I guess, Keegan Murray and Keon Ellis as the only guy on the entire team who plays defense. It's Sacramento. Like the bar is pretty low, and like them just being in the play-in in that market is like, that's probably what you're going to get.
John, they've made the playoffs once in the last 18 years. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know what else you want me to say. It's like the opposite of Daryl Morey, where Daryl Morey has such a good track record of at least being good. This is Daryl Morey's worst season, and it would be like pretty run-of-the-mill Kings year in the grand scheme of things. I just look at that team, and you say, like, oh, in that market, all you can expect is to make the play-in. Well, like, San Antonio's not in a great market. Oklahoma City's not in a great market. As a front office, I don't think there's any excuse for not having ambition. And the Kings, I'm not going to say they're totally devoid of ambition because they have clearly tried to take big swings in the past. It just they haven't been able to connect on them. I just look at where they're at right now and I say, at best, they have like an 8 seed. At worst, they have a team that's going to steadily decline over the next few years. And I'm just staring daggers at that unprotected swap with San Antonio in 2031. And I'm thinking, the track record here suggests that Wemby's going to be in his prime at that point, and the Spurs are going to be at or near the championship, and the Kings are going to be in the lottery. And I know it's 7 years away, or I guess 6 years away now. I think the Kings are going to be the thing that refurnishes that San Antonio dynasty era, whatever you want to call it. I am looking at that and thinking, like, I know it's 6 years out. I see the roadblock ahead.
Yeah, I mean, well, you flagged it on the Fox trade, right? I mean, like, how did the Kings not get more, or at least like get that back? And it's unfortunate. All right, the last team here, and I think you absolutely nailed it, and I think everybody is in agreement on this, is the Chicago Bulls, who I have had exactly zero understanding of what they've been trying to do for quite some time here. Karnisovas, I don't know, man. Like when you decide that you're going to trade Alex Caruso, who made second team all defense last year, and you get and you identify that the team that you're going to trade him to is the Oklahoma City Thunder in exchange for Josh Giddey, who they wanted to get off of, who fell out of their playoff rotation and their starters, and have a zillion picks. You have to get some of those zillion picks, and you got no picks. Like that's criminal. That's criminal.
So you know that moment in Game of Thrones where Tyrion slaps Joffrey and says, "We've had vicious kings and we've had idiot kings, but we've never had a vicious idiot for a king." That's sort of how I feel about the Bulls, where we've had cheap teams and we've had dumb teams, But the Bulls are a really dangerous combination of both cheap and dumb, where their ownership clearly is just like, make the plan every year. We got to sell tickets. We can't properly tank. And the front office is basically saying, like, we're cool with that. We have no ambition. We're going to make mistakes on all of our trades. They basically jump-started the Orlando rebuild with the Nikola Vucevic, Franz Wagner trade.
Did.
The Caruso-Giddey trade speaks for itself. The DeMar DeRozan trade, when they got him from the Spurs, they gave up a pick that they had to therefore trade Zach LaVine to get back because they refused to tank to keep it top 8 protected. You just look at everything they've done, and there's no rationale for it besides we refuse to be the worst team in the league.
Vucevic still on the team for reasons surpassing understanding. One of my favorite ones that like I LOL'd at the time and I still LOL at now that I think is like really overlooked. They gave Patrick Williams 5 for $90.
I remember arguing after that contract, like that was you gave the contract out based on the draft slot thing.
Yes.
Because Jose Alvarado got, I think, like 10 times less, some absurd number. And Jose Alvarado is a better player today than Patrick Williams is. But Jose Alvarado was an undrafted free agent, and Patrick Williams is a number 4 pick. And you're doubling down on your decision to make the wrong pick at number 4 by paying him as if he's been a successful number 4 overall pick. It's just a disaster all around. And the thing that I would say ties it all together, after the trade deadline, Karnisovas gives a press conference where he talks about the ways in which you can build a championship team. And he says something that really like red flag to me. You can win with 2 or 3 stars, or you can win with 9 or 10 very good players. Number one, that's not true. Like the 2004 Pistons aside, there's not really an example of that. But more importantly, the Bulls don't have 9 or 10 very good players. They're not close to having 9 or 10 very good players. I don't know that they have 2 or 3 very good players.
I wanted to ask you about that. Where are you on Kobe White?
I don't know, like a decent starting scoring guard. Like I think if you wanted to trade him, you could have gotten a good first round pick for him. That's about as far as I'll go.
Like I'm just thinking through the roster in the non-Nikola Vucevic veteran division. Like, is he their best player?
I think the best player, if you're truly thinking about winning, is Lonzo Ball, but that comes with all the injury red flags.
That's his own. That's his own
that's
division.
His own thing. The best
you got to put
asset,
him aside.
Yeah, probably Kobe White. I think Zealous has a chance to be very good down the line, but like that's obviously a long way off. Vucevic should have been traded 2 years ago.
2 years ago.
I don't know who the best like actual asset. Like I guess Kobe White.
I guess it's Kobe White.
I think Kobe White would be a 6 man on a good team. Like if I wanted him to get traded to the Thunder at the deadline or the Mavericks, and I think he would have come off the bench for both of those teams.
Yeah, and then they would have been happy to have him do that, and he would have been happy in that role. Oh man, that is so grim. Well, that's the reason why the Chicago Bulls round out our updated front office rankings at number 30 with a bullet. Man, that's tough. That's tough when the Mavericks trade Luka Doncic and people are like, no, it's the Bulls.
Their fan base was the single fan base that agreed most with this list. Every Bulls fan that I saw comment was basically like, you should have put him at 31.
31 is exactly right. All right. Be sure to read Sam Quinn on CBSSports.com. We're going to be back at it tomorrow. Rather, Bill will be with Brad Botkin. You can check them out live on YouTube at 12 p.m. Eastern. You can find them on YouTube at Beyond the Arc CBS. Sam, this was delightful. Nice job by you. For now, for Sam Quinn, I'm John Gonzalez. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow.